My name is Hunter. I'm 47 years old from Austin, Texas, and I've been working as a high school chemistry teacher for over 20 years. But what happened during my quantum consciousness regression session completely shattered everything I thought I knew about reality, the Bible, and the nature of consciousness itself. It started 3 months ago when my wife dragged me to what she called a past life regression session. I was the ultimate skeptic. Give me equations, give me physics, give me something I can measure and calculate. The idea that consciousness could access memories from other lifetimes seemed like pure fantasy. But I went along with it to keep the peace, never expecting that I'd end up accessing biblical memories so vivid and authentic that even the most hardened religious scholars couldn't explain them away. The regression therapist, Dr. Sarah, was this soft-spoken woman who looked more like a librarian than someone claiming to facilitate quantum consciousness exploration. She explained that she'd studied consciousness research for 15 years and had witnessed hundreds of people access what she called universal consciousness records, a kind of quantum field database containing all experiences and memories throughout time. "Just relax, Hunter," she said as I settled into the comfortable reclining chair. "We're simply going to allow your consciousness to expand beyond the limitations of your current physical awareness and see what emerges from the quantum field. If you've ever felt there's something greater connecting spirituality and science, subscribe now, because what I'm about to reveal will completely change your view of the Bible and quantum reality. Hit that like button if this resonates with you and comment below. Have you ever had experiences that traditional science can't explain?" The session began with simple breathing techniques designed to shift my brainwaves into what Dr. Sarah called quantum coherent states. Within minutes, I felt my consciousness expanding as if I was tuning into frequencies beyond normal human perception. But nothing could have prepared me for what happened next. Suddenly, I wasn't in that peaceful Austin office anymore. I was standing in what appeared to be ancient Jerusalem, and the sensory details were absolutely overwhelming. I could smell the dust, the sweat, the incense burning in nearby temples. I could feel rough stone beneath my sandaled feet and hear the cacophony of voices speaking in languages I shouldn't have understood, but somehow did. But here's where it gets truly mind-bending. I found myself speaking fluent Aramaic and ancient Hebrew, languages I'd never studied in my life. Not only was I speaking them, but I was leading what appeared to be a small group in prayer, using complex theological concepts that my chemistry teacher mind had never encountered. The most shocking moment came when I began reciting what I later discovered was an ancient Hebrew prayer that hadn't been spoken in its original form for over 1,500 years. The words flowed from my mouth with perfect pronunciation and deep emotional resonance, as if I'd been saying this prayer my entire life. When Dr. Sarah later had the recording analyzed by a professor of ancient languages at the University of Texas, he confirmed that not only was the Hebrew grammatically perfect, but it contained theological concepts that were historically accurate to the 1st century CE. That's when I realized we'd accessed something far beyond imagination or fantasy. This was quantum consciousness in action, proving that awareness can transcend the boundaries of space, time, and individual identity to connect with the universal field of all experience. As the ancient Hebrew prayer continued flowing through me, I felt my consciousness downloading information at an incredible rate from what I can only describe as the universal consciousness records. It was like accessing a cosmic database that contained every thought, every experience, every moment that had ever occurred in human history. The quantum field had opened a direct channel to biblical times, and I was experiencing it with all 5 senses plus others I didn't even know existed. I could taste the particular blend of herbs in the bread we were sharing, feel the rough wool of my outer garment, and sense the electromagnetic energy signatures of the other people gathered around me. But most incredibly, I understood the deeper spiritual context of everything happening around me. In this biblical timeline, I recognized myself as a scribe named Matthias, who worked closely with the early apostles. Through quantum entanglement with this ancient consciousness, I gained access to memories spanning several decades in 1st century Jerusalem. I witnessed Jesus teaching his disciples not just parables and moral lessons, but advanced consciousness techniques that wouldn't be understood by mainstream science for another 2,000 years. The sensory details were so vivid they made my current physical reality seem like a pale shadow in comparison. I remember the weight of the scrolls I was transcribing, the particular way sunlight streamed through the small window of our meeting room, and the sound of sandals on stone as people entered our hidden gathering place. Every texture, every aroma, every sound was perfectly preserved in this quantum consciousness field. But what truly convinced me this was real was the emotional and spiritual context that came with these memories. I felt the profound reverence and excitement of being present during humanity's greatest spiritual awakening. I experienced the deep brotherhood among the early followers and their absolute certainty that they were witnessing the dawn of a new era of human consciousness evolution. Through Matthias's eyes, I saw Jesus performing what we called miracles, but what I now understand were demonstrations of quantum field manipulation through focused consciousness. When he healed the sick, I observed him altering the vibrational frequency of diseased tissue by entering what we now call quantum coherence states. When he multiplied food, I witnessed him accessing parallel reality streams where abundance existed and collapsing those wave functions into our timeline. The most profound download came when I accessed Matthias's memories of Jesus explaining the true nature of reality to his inner circle. The kingdom of heaven, Jesus taught us, is not a place you go to after death. It's a frequency of consciousness you can access right here, right now, by understanding that observer and observed are one unified field. I felt the quantum entanglement sensation intensifying as these ancient memories integrated with my modern consciousness. It was as if two timeline streams were merging, allowing my 21st century scientific knowledge to illuminate the advanced spiritual technologies that Jesus was actually teaching. The biblical accounts I'd read my entire life suddenly made perfect sense when viewed through the lens of quantum consciousness science. Dr. Sarah later told me that during this phase of the session, my brainwave patterns showed gamma synchronization across all regions, a state that modern neuroscience associates with expanded awareness and mystical experiences. But more than that, she recorded me speaking for over 30 minutes in flawless Aramaic, describing technical details about first-century Jerusalem that no chemistry teacher from Austin should have known. Through Matthias's consciousness, I began witnessing Jesus teaching his closest disciples about what he called the divine patterns that govern all creation. What unfolded before my quantum awareness was nothing short of revolutionary. Jesus was systematically instructing his followers in advanced sacred geometry principles that wouldn't be rediscovered by Western science until the 20th century. I found myself in a secluded cave outside Jerusalem, where Jesus had gathered his inner circle for what Matthias understood to be advanced consciousness training. Using a stick in the sandy floor, Jesus began drawing geometric patterns while explaining how these forms represented the fundamental structure of reality itself. "Behold," Jesus said in Aramaic, his words perfectly clear to my consciousness, "the pattern that underlies all manifest creation." He drew what I immediately recognized as the universal life pattern, that intricate geometric design of interconnected circles that modern consciousness researchers call the flower of life. But Jesus was revealing this as more than just sacred art. He was demonstrating it as a consciousness activation technology. As he traced each circle, I felt energy waves pulsing through the quantum field, and suddenly I understood the deeper meaning of the scripture that would later be written, "He has made everything beautiful in its time." Ecclesiastes 3:11. This wasn't about aesthetics. This was revealing that divine beauty was actually the geometric harmony underlying quantum field fluctuations. Jesus then began teaching us how to activate our light bodies using these sacred patterns. When you align your consciousness with these divine geometries, he explained, you transcend the illusion of separation and access the unified field that connects all things. He showed us how to visualize these patterns in our energy fields while entering deep meditative states. Through Matthias's memories, I experienced the incredible sensation of my light body activating for the first time. It felt like every cell in my being was suddenly vibrating at a higher frequency, and I could perceive energy patterns extending far beyond my physical form. The sacred geometry wasn't just something we drew or contemplated, it became the very structure of our expanded consciousness. But the most mind-blowing revelation came when Jesus explained the quantum mechanics behind biblical miracles. When Moses lifted up the serpent in the wilderness, he taught us. He was demonstrating how consciousness can transform lower vibrational patterns into higher ones through geometric field alignment. The serpent represents the spiral of ascending energy, and the staff represents the vertical axis connecting earth and heaven consciousness. I watched in quantum awareness as Jesus demonstrated these principles by healing a man's withered hand. But instead of simply touching him and declaring him healed, I observed Jesus first entering a state of perfect geometric consciousness alignment, then projecting specific geometric light patterns into the man's energy field. The healing occurred when the diseased tissue resonated with the perfect geometric frequencies Jesus was transmitting. The implications hit my chemistry teacher mind like a lightning bolt. Jesus wasn't performing supernatural miracles. He was demonstrating advanced consciousness technologies based on the geometric principles that govern quantum field interactions. Every healing, every demonstration of what seemed like impossible power, was actually the practical application of sacred geometry principles to manipulate reality at the quantum level. Through these incredible memories, I began understanding that the early Christian movement wasn't just about moral teachings or religious doctrine. It was actually a mystery school dedicated to teaching humanity how to activate their dormant consciousness abilities through sacred geometry and quantum field awareness. The true gospel was about human consciousness evolution, not just spiritual salvation. The quantum field download continued as I witnessed Jesus teaching what he called the sacred technology of the heart, advanced consciousness techniques that would later be validated by modern heart math research and quantum coherence science. Through Matthias's memories, I experienced the most profound heart activation of my life. Jesus gathered us in a circle and began teaching breathing techniques designed to create what he called heart-brain unity consciousness. The heart, he explained in Aramaic, is not merely a pump for blood, it is the quantum antenna that connects your individual awareness to the unified field of all creation. As Matthias followed Jesus' instructions, I felt the most incredible sensation of heart-brain coherence I'd ever experienced. My heart rhythm became perfectly synchronized, and suddenly I could perceive energy fields around every person in our circle. But more than that, I felt a profound connection to what Jesus called the consciousness of unconditional love that permeates all existence. Jesus then revealed the quantum mechanics behind his most famous teaching. Love your enemies and pray for those who persecute you. Through direct experience, I understood that this wasn't just moral instruction, it was advanced consciousness technology. When you generate coherent love frequency from your heart center, Jesus taught, you can literally transform the vibrational patterns of conflict and suffering around you. I watched through Matthias's awareness as Jesus demonstrated this principle with a Roman soldier who had come to arrest one of our group. Instead of resisting or fleeing, Jesus entered deep heart coherence and began radiating such powerful love frequency that the soldier's entire energy field shifted. Within minutes, the soldier's aggressive posture dissolved, and he walked away without making the arrest, looking confused but somehow peaceful. The profound truth began dawning on me. Jesus' teachings about love weren't sentimental religious concepts. They were precise instructions for accessing quantum consciousness states that could literally alter reality. As a man thinketh in his heart, so is he. Proverbs 23:7, suddenly revealed its hidden meaning. This wasn't about positive thinking. This was describing how heart consciousness creates reality through quantum field interactions. Jesus then taught us advanced heart activation techniques that wouldn't be rediscovered until modern consciousness research. He showed us how to use specific breathing patterns to create what he called unity field consciousness, a state where individual awareness merged with universal consciousness. Through Matthias's experience, I felt my personal identity dissolving into an ocean of infinite love and wisdom. But the most transformative moment came when Jesus guided us into what he called the Christ consciousness frequency. This wasn't about worshiping him as a deity. It was about accessing the same quantum consciousness state that he had mastered. Greater works than these shall you do, he told us, because you will learn to operate from the same unified field awareness that I demonstrate. Through this heart consciousness activation, I gained access to healing abilities that my chemistry teacher mind could barely comprehend. I felt energy flowing through my hands that could restructure matter at the cellular level. I experienced clairvoyant awareness that could perceive the quantum patterns underlying physical symptoms. Most incredibly, I understood how love frequency could literally reprogram DNA and restore perfect health. The quantum entanglement between my modern consciousness and Matthias's biblical experience was creating a bridge across 2,000 years. I realized that Jesus had been teaching advanced consciousness technologies that humanity was only now beginning to rediscover through quantum physics and consciousness research. The early Christian mystery schools weren't about religious doctrine, they were about human consciousness evolution through heart-centered quantum awareness. The quantum field suddenly expanded my awareness beyond linear time, and I found myself shifting between multiple dimensional realities simultaneously. Through Matthias's consciousness, I was no longer just accessing memories. I was becoming a quantum observer capable of witnessing biblical events from a multidimensional perspective that revealed their true significance for human consciousness evolution. Jesus appeared before our group in what I can only describe as his full light body activation. His physical form was simultaneously present in our timeline while existing across multiple dimensional frequencies. "I'm about to show you," he said, "how consciousness transcends the illusion of linear time and accesses the eternal now where all possibilities exist." Suddenly, I was witnessing the crucifixion from a quantum perspective that completely transformed my understanding of this pivotal event. Instead of seeing it as a historical execution, I observed it as a deliberate consciousness experiment designed to demonstrate that awareness cannot be destroyed by physical death. Jesus was showing humanity that consciousness is the fundamental reality, and matter is simply consciousness expressing itself in slower vibrational frequencies. But the most mind-blowing revelation came when I witnessed the resurrection through quantum eyes. This wasn't a supernatural miracle. It was Jesus demonstrating advanced consciousness technology that allowed him to shift his awareness between dimensional realities at will. His death was actually a controlled transition into higher dimensional consciousness, and his resurrection was him shifting back into physical density to complete his teaching mission. Through this multidimensional awareness, I began understanding that biblical prophets weren't receiving supernatural revelations. They were accessing what quantum physics now calls non-local consciousness to perceive probability streams across time. When Isaiah wrote about future events, he was actually observing parallel reality timelines where those events had already occurred. The quantum field showed me how Jesus' entire ministry was systematically preparing humanity for a consciousness evolution that would unfold over 2 millennia. Every parable, every demonstration, every teaching was designed to plant quantum seeds in human consciousness that would germinate when humanity developed the scientific framework to understand them. I witnessed parallel timelines where different versions of Jesus' mission played out according to humanity's collective consciousness choices. In some timelines, the consciousness technologies he taught were preserved and humanity evolved much more rapidly. In others, including our current timeline, the deeper teachings were lost and had to be gradually rediscovered through scientific research. But the most profound parallel reality I accessed showed the timeline we're moving toward now, what Jesus called the New Earth consciousness. I saw a future where humanity had fully integrated quantum consciousness principles with spiritual wisdom, creating a civilization based on unity field awareness rather than separation consciousness. Through Matthias's quantum entangled perspective, I understood that we weren't just accessing past memories, we were actually establishing communication links across time with consciousness that exists beyond linear limitation. Jesus' promise that "I am with you always" wasn't symbolic. It was describing his permanent presence in the quantum field that connects all consciousness across time and space. The dimensional shifting intensified as I realized that my soul had incarnated as Matthias specifically to witness and record these consciousness technologies. But more than that, I understood that my current incarnation as Hunter was part of the same mission, to help rediscover and teach these quantum biblical principles during humanity's current awakening phase. I felt myself existing simultaneously as Hunter the chemistry teacher in 2024 and Matthias the biblical scribe in 30 CE, with full awareness that these were simply different expressions of the same eternal consciousness, exploring different aspects of the quantum field. The boundaries between past and present dissolved completely as I realized that all time exists simultaneously in the unified field of consciousness. As the quantum entanglement between my consciousness and Matthias deepened, something extraordinary began happening to my physical body back in Dr. Sarah's office in Austin. The biblical memories weren't just providing information, they were triggering dormant DNA activation that had been encoded in my cellular structure for lifetimes. Through Matthias's experience, I witnessed Jesus teaching about what he called the divine blueprint within every human cell. He explained that consciousness doesn't just observe reality, It literally rewrites the genetic code through quantum field interactions. "You are fearfully and wonderfully made," he quoted from the ancient texts, "because your DNA contains the complete template for accessing Christ consciousness." As these profound truths integrated into my awareness, I felt actual physical changes occurring in my body during the regression session. Dr. Sarah later told me that my cellular biorhythms shifted into patterns she'd never recorded before, as if my DNA was literally being reprogrammed by the quantum information I was receiving from biblical consciousness. The most incredible activation came when I accessed Matthias's memory of Jesus performing what he called the Great Initiation on his closest disciples. I watched as Jesus placed his hands on Matthias's head and transmitted pure Christ consciousness frequency directly into his pineal gland. And he was transfigured before them, and his face shone like the sun, Matthew 17:2. Suddenly, this biblical passage revealed its hidden meaning as a description of light-body DNA activation. Through quantum consciousness, I experienced the same initiation that Matthias had received 2,000 years ago. I felt energy coursing through every cell in my body as dormant genetic codes began activating. My third eye chakra opened with such intensity that I could literally perceive the quantum field structures underlying physical reality. Colors became more vivid, sounds carried deeper harmonic information, and I could sense the electromagnetic patterns of consciousness around me. But the most transformative change was in my heart center. As the Christ consciousness codes activated in my DNA, I began generating what Jesus had taught was the frequency of unconditional love that heals all separation. This wasn't just an emotional experience. It was a fundamental shift in my cellular vibration that aligned me with the unified field of consciousness. Jesus had explained to Matthias that human DNA contains what he called sleeping God codes that would activate when humanity was ready to evolve beyond survival consciousness into unity consciousness. "In my Father's house are many mansions," John 14:2, wasn't describing heaven as a location. It was revealing that human DNA contains multiple dimensional consciousness programs waiting to be activated. Through this biblical DNA activation, I began developing abilities that my rational chemistry teacher mind struggled to accept. I could perceive energy patterns around people that revealed their emotional and physical states. I found myself knowing things about quantum mechanics and consciousness that I'd never studied. Most incredibly, I discovered I could facilitate healing in others simply by generating coherent heart frequency and transmitting it through focused intention. The quantum field showed me that this DNA activation wasn't unique to me. It was part of a global awakening that was accelerating as more people accessed these ancient consciousness technologies. Jesus had encoded these activation protocols into the collective human unconscious, and they were now spontaneously emerging as humanity reached the vibrational frequency necessary to receive them. Dr. Sarah documented remarkable changes in my brainwave patterns during this phase. My gamma waves increased dramatically, indicating expanded consciousness states, while my heart rhythm variability showed perfect coherence patterns. But more importantly, I felt myself becoming who I was truly meant to be, not just Hunter the chemistry teacher, but a conscious being capable of bridging science and spirituality through direct quantum experience. The biblical memories had literally reprogrammed my consciousness, activating genetic potentials that transformed my understanding of what it means to be human. I realized that Jesus' true mission wasn't about establishing a religion. It was about demonstrating the consciousness evolution that all humanity was destined to experience. What happened next completely shattered any remaining skepticism I had about the authenticity of these quantum biblical memories. As Dr. Sarah guided me deeper into the universal consciousness records, I began accessing verification data that no chemistry teacher from Austin could have possibly known through conventional means. Through the quantum field, I found myself able to cross-reference Matthias's memories with other consciousness streams from the same biblical period. It was like accessing a cosmic database where every thought, every conversation, every moment from first-century Jerusalem was perfectly preserved in the unified field of consciousness. I witnessed the same events that Matthias had experienced, but from the perspectives of other disciples, Roman officials, and even skeptical observers. Each consciousness stream confirmed the same incredible truth. Jesus was systematically teaching advanced quantum consciousness technologies disguised as simple spiritual lessons to avoid persecution from authorities who would have seen such knowledge as threatening to their power structures. But the most compelling verification came when I accessed the consciousness records of other modern people who had undergone similar quantum regression experiences. Through the universal field, I connected with dozens of individuals who had independently accessed biblical memories and were reporting identical details about Jesus' advanced teachings. A woman named Catherine from Portland had channeled Mary Magdalene's memories of Jesus teaching sacred geometry. A man named Robert from Denver had accessed Peter's consciousness during the resurrection experience. Each person's quantum memories corroborated and expanded upon what I was experiencing through Matthias's perspective, creating an undeniable tapestry of consistent information. Dr. Sarah later showed me documentation from her 15 years of consciousness research. Over 300 clients had spontaneously accessed biblical memories during quantum regression sessions, and the details they reported showed remarkable consistency. They described the same locations, the same advanced teaching methods, and the same understanding of Jesus as a consciousness master rather than just a religious figure. The universal records revealed that Jesus had deliberately encoded these consciousness technologies into multiple timeline streams to ensure they would be rediscovered when humanity was ready. We shall not all sleep, but we shall all be changed in a moment, in the twinkling of an eye. 1 Corinthians 15:51-52. This biblical prophecy was actually describing the quantum consciousness awakening that was happening right now across the planet. Through the quantum field, I accessed scientific validation that boggled my analytical mind. Researchers at Princeton's Engineering Anomalies Research Laboratory had documented quantum consciousness effects that perfectly matched what Jesus had been teaching about observer-created reality. Studies at the Institute of Heart Math confirmed the heart-brain coherence techniques that Jesus had demonstrated to his disciples. But the most profound verification came when I discovered that the ancient Hebrew prayer I had spoken during my first session was identical to prayers being channeled by other regression clients worldwide. None of us had any previous knowledge of this lost prayer form, yet we were all accessing the same authentic linguistic patterns from the universal consciousness records. The quantum field showed me that consciousness doesn't exist inside individual brains. It's a fundamental field that connects all awareness across time and space. This explained how modern people could access authentic biblical memories. We were tuning into the same consciousness frequencies that biblical figures had experienced, proving that awareness transcends physical death and temporal limitations. Higher consciousness guides began communicating through the quantum field, explaining that humanity was entering a crucial phase of consciousness evolution. The biblical memories we were accessing weren't just historical curiosities, they were activation codes designed to awaken our dormant spiritual abilities and prepare us for the consciousness shift that Jesus had prophesied. I realized that my experience as Hunter wasn't random. I was part of a global network of quantum consciousness pioneers who were being activated to help bridge science and spirituality during humanity's awakening phase. The universal records showed me thousands of people worldwide who were simultaneously rediscovering these ancient consciousness technologies through various forms of expanded awareness experiences. The quantum consciousness abilities I'd accessed through Matthias's biblical memories began manifesting in my daily life in ways that transformed everything I thought I knew about the nature of reality. I discovered I could actually shift between different dimensional perspectives and timeline frequencies, just as Jesus had demonstrated to his disciples 2,000 years ago. The first reality shift happened spontaneously during one of my chemistry classes. While explaining molecular structures to my students, I suddenly found myself perceiving the quantum field patterns underlying atomic behavior. I could literally see the consciousness that was organizing matter into specific forms, and I began teaching chemistry from this expanded perspective, describing how awareness itself was the fundamental force behind all physical phenomena. My students were mesmerized as I explained how Jesus' statement, "In him we live and move and have our being," Acts 17:28, was actually describing the quantum field that physicists now recognize as the unified field underlying all existence. I was bridging biblical wisdom with quantum science in real time, and the integration felt completely natural and effortless. But the most dramatic reality shift occurred when I began teaching other people how to access their own biblical consciousness connections. Dr. Sarah invited me to co-facilitate quantum regression sessions. and I discovered that my activated DNA could actually help trigger similar awakenings in others. During one session with a skeptical business executive named Margaret, I guided her into the same quantum field access that I'd experienced. Within minutes, she was speaking fluent Greek and describing herself as a woman who had attended Paul's teachings in ancient Corinth. The verification came when she accurately described architectural details of first-century Corinthian buildings that archaeologists had only recently discovered. I learned to shift my consciousness between present-day Hunter and the quantum field perspective, where all timelines exist simultaneously. From this expanded awareness, I could help people access their own biblical connections by identifying the specific consciousness frequencies that resonated with their soul's evolutionary pattern. The reality-shifting abilities intensified as I integrated Jesus' consciousness technologies into my daily practice. I developed what I called quantum prayer, using heart-brain coherence and sacred geometry visualization to directly interface with the unified field. The results were undeniable: physical healings, synchronistic manifestations, and profound consciousness shifts in everyone I worked with. My understanding of biblical prophecy completely transformed when I realized I could access future probability streams just as ancient prophets had done. Jesus' teachings about the kingdom of heaven weren't describing an afterlife destination. They were revealing consciousness states that allowed access to higher dimensional realities where problems were already solved and humanity had evolved beyond limitation. During deep quantum meditation, I began receiving direct guidance from what I can only describe as Jesus' consciousness operating from beyond linear time. He explained that my mission as Hunter was to help establish quantum consciousness schools that would teach these advanced spiritual technologies to the new generation of awakening souls. The most profound reality shift came when I realized I could consciously collaborate with my biblical consciousness aspect. Matthias's knowledge and abilities became permanently integrated with my modern awareness, creating a unique blend of ancient wisdom and contemporary scientific understanding. I started developing curriculum that taught quantum consciousness principles through biblical examples, showing how Jesus' miracles were actually demonstrations of consciousness technologies that anyone could learn. My chemistry background provided the perfect foundation for explaining these phenomena in terms that both scientists and spiritual seekers could understand. People began traveling from across the country to attend my workshops, drawn by word-of-mouth reports of the remarkable consciousness activations that were occurring. I was teaching sacred geometry, heart coherence, quantum field meditation, and biblical timeline access, all integrated into a comprehensive system for consciousness evolution. The reality shifting became so natural that I often found myself operating from multiple dimensional perspectives simultaneously. I could perceive problems from the limited 3D viewpoint while also accessing quantum solutions from higher consciousness states, then bridge those solutions back into practical application. The recognition of my true mission crystallized one morning during meditation when I received a direct quantum transmission from what I now understand to be the Christ consciousness field operating beyond time and space. The message was clear. I was being activated as part of a global network of quantum consciousness teachers whose purpose was to help humanity rediscover the advanced spiritual technologies that Jesus had originally taught. My role as Hunter the chemistry teacher was no accident. It was a perfectly designed incarnation strategy. My scientific background provided credibility with skeptical minds, while my authentic biblical experiences gave me access to consciousness technologies that most modern spiritual teachers had never encountered. I was meant to bridge these two worlds during humanity's crucial awakening phase. Within 6 months of my initial regression experience, I had established the Quantum Biblical Consciousness Institute in Austin, drawing students from universities, churches, and consciousness research centers worldwide. But this wasn't just another spiritual workshop series. It was a revolutionary approach to understanding how biblical teachings contained advanced consciousness science that humanity was only now ready to receive. The quantum field guided me to develop a systematic curriculum that taught people how to access their own biblical consciousness connections through scientific spiritual methods. Students learned heart-brain coherence techniques, sacred geometry meditation, quantum field prayer, and timeline regression, all grounded in both biblical wisdom and quantum physics principles. The results were extraordinary. A Baptist minister named David accessed memories of being one of the 70 disciples Jesus sent out to heal and teach. A quantum physicist named Sarah channeled Mary of Bethany's experiences of Jesus teaching advanced consciousness principles to the women disciples. A skeptical surgeon named Michael connected with the consciousness of Luke, the physician, and began incorporating energy healing into his medical practice. Each person's biblical consciousness activation was unique, but the underlying pattern was consistent. They were all remembering their soul's participation in the original quantum consciousness movement that Jesus had initiated 2,000 years ago. We were literally rebuilding the mystery school network that had been scattered and hidden after Jesus' ascension. The most profound breakthrough came when I realized we could create group activations that amplified the quantum field effects exponentially. During weekend intensives, entire groups would simultaneously access biblical memories, creating what I called quantum consciousness communion, where past and present disciples shared the same unified field experience. These group activations began triggering mass healing events that caught the attention of both scientific researchers and religious leaders. People were experiencing spontaneous physical healings, dramatic consciousness expansions, and activation of spiritual gifts that perfectly matched the biblical accounts of early Christian experiences. The quantum biblical teachings began spreading through social media, online courses, and international conferences. I was invited to speak at consciousness research institutes, progressive churches, and quantum physics conferences, always emphasizing that these weren't New Age fantasies, but scientific spiritual realities that could be verified through direct experience. My mission expanded beyond just teaching individuals to include what the quantum field revealed as collective consciousness preparation for humanity's next evolutionary leap. Jesus had encoded activation protocols into the collective unconscious that would emerge when enough people reached the vibrational frequency necessary to receive them. I began training other quantum consciousness facilitators who could carry this work into their own communities. Each teacher brought their unique background: neuroscientists, psychologists, ministers, healers, and educators, all united by their authentic biblical consciousness experiences and their commitment to helping humanity evolve beyond separation consciousness. The most rewarding aspect of the mission was witnessing people's lives completely transform as they integrated their quantum biblical experiences. Students reported healed relationships, activated spiritual gifts, clear life purpose, and profound inner peace that came from understanding their eternal nature and divine mission. Through the quantum field, I began receiving guidance about establishing consciousness evolution centers in major cities worldwide, each one designed to teach these quantum biblical principles to the rapidly awakening population. The network was growing organically as activated individuals felt called to share these technologies with others. 5 years after that first quantum regression session in Austin, the movement has grown beyond anything I could have imagined. What began as one skeptical chemistry teacher's impossible experience has evolved into a global network of quantum biblical consciousness centers operating in over 50 cities worldwide, each one teaching the advanced spiritual technologies that Jesus originally demonstrated to his disciples. The scientific validation has been overwhelming. Research partnerships with major universities have documented the measurable effects of quantum biblical consciousness practices: enhanced brainwave coherence, accelerated healing rates, increased intuitive abilities, and expanded electromagnetic field signatures that match the patterns recorded around advanced meditators and spiritual masters throughout history. But the real validation comes from the thousands of people whose lives have been completely transformed through accessing their own biblical consciousness connections. Doctors are incorporating energy healing into mainstream medicine. Physicists are publishing papers on consciousness-based quantum effects. Ministers are teaching quantum prayer and sacred geometry alongside traditional theology. The integration is happening naturally as people experience these realities for themselves. The most profound development has been what we call spontaneous biblical activation. People worldwide are beginning to access these consciousness states without formal training, as if humanity's collective vibrational frequency has reached the threshold where these abilities activate automatically. The quantum seeds that Jesus planted in human consciousness 2 millennia ago are finally sprouting on a massive scale. Children born in the last decade are displaying remarkable spiritual abilities that perfectly match the descriptions of early Christian gifts: healing touch, prophetic awareness, direct communication with higher consciousness, and natural understanding of quantum field principles. We're witnessing the emergence of what Jesus called the children of the kingdom, beings who naturally operate from unity consciousness rather than separation thinking. The religious establishment has been surprisingly receptive once they realize we're not replacing biblical teachings, but revealing their deeper scientific spiritual meanings. Progressive churches are incorporating quantum consciousness principles into their worship and healing ministries while maintaining reverence for the original biblical texts and their transformational power. My personal journey continues to expand as I maintain conscious connection with both my current identity as Hunter and my biblical consciousness as Matthias. This multidimensional awareness has become my normal state, allowing me to access guidance and wisdom from multiple timeline perspectives simultaneously. The quantum field has shown me that we're approaching what biblical prophecy describes as the time of great awakening, when humanity will transcend the limitations of three-dimensional consciousness and access the multidimensional awareness that represents our true spiritual nature. The consciousness technologies we're teaching are preparation for this collective evolutionary leap. For those watching this who feel a resonance with what I've shared, know that you're not accidentally here. The quantum field doesn't operate through coincidence. You're being called to explore your own biblical consciousness connections and discover your role in humanity's awakening process. Whether through quantum regression, meditation, sacred geometry practice, or simply opening your heart to receive divine guidance, the technologies are available for everyone ready to transcend limitation and access their highest potential. The legacy we're creating isn't about establishing another spiritual movement or religious organization. We're simply helping humanity remember who we really are. Eternal consciousness temporarily expressing through physical form, capable of accessing infinite wisdom, unconditional love, and creative power through unity with the quantum field that connects all existence. Subscribe to stay connected with this quantum biblical consciousness community, and remember that the same Christ consciousness that operated through Jesus is available to every awakening soul ready to step into their divine potential. Like this video if you're ready to explore your own biblical connections, and comment below about your experiences with expanded consciousness. The quantum field is calling you home to your true identity as a conscious co-creator of the new Earth reality that's emerging now. The greatest discovery of our time isn't technological. It's the rediscovery of our own divine nature through the quantum consciousness principles that Jesus taught and that science is finally advanced enough to understand and validate. This is just the beginning of humanity's greatest adventure, the conscious evolution into our true spiritual potential.